My name is Matt Singer. I'm the arts and culture editor at Willamette Week. And today I'm speaking with Tori Williams-Douglas. She is a Portland-based anti-racist educator and host of the White Homework podcast. Tori, thank you so much for speaking today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. There's obviously a ton of stuff to talk about right now, but we kind of started this series with the idea of talking to people sort of about how they've been holding up in quarantine. So I'll just start by asking you how you've been doing. What have you been doing the last 3 months to kind of keep your sanity?
So actually it was very strange, the timing, but so what I've been working on actually all year is getting the podcast ready to relaunch and starting this initiative that I created called Pay the Rent. So we're through my Patreon, we're paying the rent for a Black family for a year. And so that's really what I've been working on since quarantine started, and even before, since January, February is when I really started having meetings about this and talking about it. And it was so the timing was, I don't want to say it wasn't good timing, right? Because there's no good timing for Black death. There just isn't. But people were ready to hear what I had to say. And I just so happened that people were ready to hear the week that I was releasing all of this work into the world.
So tell me a little bit about the development of White Homework, which was, for people who don't know, it didn't start as a podcast. It was sort of at least my understanding was that it was, it was literally a curriculum.
Yeah. So after the Ferguson uprisings, I started on social media, writing a lot more about Black justice and LGBTQ issues, and people started asking me questions over time. I kind of built up some amount of following on social media, and people were really responsive to what I was putting out, but everyone was asking for these very specific, what can I do in my specific circumstances, with the resource and the access, the resources and access that I have as a white person, what am I supposed to do? And so that's a very time-consuming process. And so I created White Homework to give people the opportunity to ask the questions that I would sit down and ask them anyway. And then with those answers, they can decide where they can jump in, right? Because we don't all have the same ability. We don't all have the same amount of free time. We don't all have the same amount of cash. So really honing in on what white people can do, you as an individual or you as your family unit, whatever that looks like, what can you do to contribute to restorative justice?
What do you hear from people in that capacity? What's the most frequent thing that you're asked by white people who are trying to become better allies?
Honestly, it's just, what can I do? And it's a fair question because it's not something that we teach in school. Even if you go to college, you're not being educated on how to do anti-racist work in your workplace, in your kid's school. It's not something that we're teaching. So it's again, being able to say, you're an individual. So yeah, what can you do? And that's really what I ended up, that's what White Homework is me asking, what can you do? And giving people a framework to kind of go through and figure that out.
What do you think is the most harmful thing that well-meaning white people do, often sort of in an attempt at allyship, if that makes sense?
Well, it's kind of different. I think for people who are, I think it depends. I think for white women, especially, it's the emotions, it's the white tears, it's the making everything. It's I screwed up, and so now I'm going to make everything about me, and everyone needs to care for me and make sure that I'm okay so that I can keep doing this work. And I think for white cis men, it's taking the mic, right? It's no, you need to sit down. Just sit down, be quiet. You can learn something from other people, people who have other experiences. So yeah, I would say that it kind of depends. It depends on who you are and where you are in terms of the social hierarchy, what the most harmful things are. But yeah, I think that those are, they both end up doing the same thing, right? Where they're taking away from they're taking people of color and shutting down our voices by making anti-racist work or allyship all about them as individuals. So
to talk about the current protests that are happening, are you how do you feel about what you've been seeing, particularly in Portland?
I mean, I think like the protests in Portland on like just a deeply personal level have been incredibly inspiring. To see people show up day after day has just been really, it's been amazing. And it's like living in a white supremacist society, like to see white bodies showing up for your life because they value you as a human being, as an individual, as someone who contributes to the community, is just, yeah, I don't really have words for it yet. I'm still processing like everything that I've been seeing and like experiencing.
And a lot of who is kind of waging this fight, the people who are actually going out on the streets every night, are, they're people that, I haven't looked at the actual demographic numbers, but just, when you look at the crowd, it's people who are in their 20s or even younger.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you feel like the younger generation that's coming up, Generation Z or whatever, I'm not good with the generational divides, but I think it's Generation Z. Do you feel like that they are more inherently anti-racist than any generation that's come before?
You know what? I don't know if I would say that. Like, I don't know if I have enough information to make that claim. I do think that like the data that I've seen does show that they're very in support of what we would call socialist policies, but that kind of lends itself to a lot more easily than like democratic or liberal policies to restorative justice, right? So that's been something that's been really interesting. And they've had all of these horrific experiences and traumas collectively that they have gone through that I think really kind of colors the way that they see Black bodies being killed, right? That like our lives being taken from us. I think because of just the mind-boggling number like of school shootings that have taken place, and the fact that all kids now have to do like active shooter drills, K through 12. I think that has built some empathy in to this generation that maybe didn't exist in the past.
I'm trying to think of the best way to form this question. I mean, do you feel like, is this like an incremental fight that's happening right now? Like, is it a thing where you just think of it as we fix the systemic racism? I mean, we're not going to fix it, but we try to work on that and then we move on to the next thing? Or do you feel like things get blurred? Like, is there a chance where if there is actual police reform, that maybe people will think, oh, we've fixed it?
We fixed it. Yeah. I think absolutely. I think that we've seen that with civil rights legislation, in the late 60s, that was very much just like, okay, we've got all these things. It's like, we have protections. Now you can't be discriminated against in housing. You can't be discriminated against like in your workplace. You can't be discriminated against in terms of like education or access to education. And so people are like, yeah, we fixed it, but there was no enforcement. Right? Like that legislation was important, but there was no funding given to enforcement. And so we see in the data that things haven't changed that much. They did get a little bit better for a while. They trended better, but we're kind of back to where we were before that legislation passed. So yeah, I definitely think that I think it's inevitable that we'll kind of lose some momentum at some point, especially if we are able to like defund the police and put those resources back into communities that Portland has historically intentionally divested from, which is hugely important. And that's where those funds belong because they were stolen. And that's its own conversation, honestly. But yeah, so I think that for sure, like once we get that, I think people will think that the problem is solved, and it won't be, but it will still be a really important step.